Hi. Most zombie games are all about action, hordes, gunfire, explosions, and you always feel in control. But there are other games, the ones where you're not the hero, where every step is a risk, every sound makes you freeze, and even silence starts to feel tense. In this video, we're talking about exactly those kinds of games. Games where zombies aren't just enemies, but part of a world that clearly doesn't want you there. Let's start with No More Room in Hell 2. This isn't the kind of game where you feel like a hero. You're just a regular person trying to survive, and that's exactly what makes the atmosphere so intense. Limited resources, scarce ammo, and the constant feeling that any mistake could be your last. It all keeps you on edge. You don't run around like in typical shooters. You listen, you watch the darkness, and you try not to make a sound. The co-op is where it really shines. This isn't a fun, run in and wipe everything out kind of game. It's more like a desperate struggle where you and your team are barely holding on. One person runs out of ammo, and it becomes everyone's problem. Someone falls behind, and there's no guarantee you'll get them back. The atmosphere here isn't built on jump scares, but on helplessness and a very real sense of danger. Resident Evil 2. This is a perfect example of how atmosphere should work in a zombie horror game. The police station turns into a maze where every hallway is a risk and every door is a question mark. You're constantly on edge because the game never lets you feel safe, not even for a second. And the most important part, the silence. Sometimes you're just walking down an empty corridor, hearing your own footsteps, and suddenly you realize you're not alone. Then Mr. X shows up and completely changes the pace. Now it's not just horror, it's a constant chase. Moments like that don't just make the game scary, they make it genuinely oppressive. The Last of Us Part 2. This isn't just a game about zombies. It's about people living in a world that's already broken. The atmosphere isn't built only on the infected, but on this overwhelming sense of hopelessness. Abandoned cities, overgrown streets, silence broken by footsteps or distant screams. It all creates a very heavy, almost physical feeling. But what really hits is how the game makes you feel every encounter. You're not just fighting, you're surviving, often in messy, brutal, uncomfortable ways. Every fight is stressful, every enemy is a threat, and even winning doesn't feel like relief. In the end, you're left not just with the atmosphere of an apocalypse, but with the sense that this world will never be normal again. Dying Light 2, Stay Human. This game builds its atmosphere through the feeling of a city that still seems alive, just not for people anymore. During the day, you see the ruins of civilization, overgrown buildings and remnants of the past. But the real game begins at night. When the sun goes down, the streets completely change, and you realize you're no longer in control. That day and night contrast is what makes it so tense. During the day, you explore, plan, gather resources. At night, you survive. Any sound can attract the infected, and one wrong move can turn into a full chase. And when you're running across rooftops, trying to escape, you genuinely feel like the city itself is against you. Days Gone. This game is about loneliness. You're constantly on the road, riding your bike through a broken world where barely anyone is left. Forests, empty highways, abandoned towns. It all creates a calm but deeply unsettling atmosphere, like you've been cut off from everything. And then the hordes show up and everything changes. It's no longer just survival, it's pure panic. You see hundreds of infected moving like a single organism, and you realize running is your only option. That contrast between the quiet of the road and sudden chaos is what makes the game so memorable. Dead Island 2. Dead Island 2 takes a slightly different approach. Its atmosphere is built on contrast. Sunny Los Angeles, bright streets, pools, luxury homes, and right in the middle of it all, a zombie apocalypse. That clash between a perfect world and what's actually happening makes it feel really unique. At the same time, the game doesn't turn into pure chaos. There's still tension, especially in tighter indoor locations where things start to feel claustrophobic. You're in this bright, colorful world, but the danger never goes away. And because of that, Dead Island 2 creates its own kind of atmosphere, not as dark as others, but still very engaging in its own way. Project Zomboid. This is probably the most honest zombie apocalypse game out there. There's no heroism, no epic moments, just you in a world that slowly kills you. Every little detail matters. You forgot to close a window, made too much noise, didn't check a house, and that's it, your story ends. The game tells you right from the start, this is how you die. And that's exactly what creates such a powerful atmosphere. You start to value silence, fear every little sound, and think ahead all the time. Even a simple food run turns into a stressful situation. This isn't about action, it's about slow, inevitable survival where you're not beating the system, just trying to last a little longer. Zombi. This is a grounded, no-nonsense horror game that doesn't try to entertain you. It keeps you under constant pressure. London feels cold, empty, and hostile, and the game almost goes out of its way to make you uncomfortable. Slow animations, heavy melee combat, and real-time inventory management mean you never feel safe. The strongest idea here is death. When you die, you don't just reload, you start over. And your previous character stays in the world as a zombie, and you have to find them to get your gear back. That creates a lot of pressure. You don't fear death because you'll lose progress, but because you'll lose everything. Contagion. This game is all about panic and chaos. There's no sense of control. Everything can fall apart at any moment. Dark environments, limited resources, and that constant feeling that things are about to go wrong. Even a simple objective like reach the exit turns into a tense challenge. What really makes it stand out is the interaction with other players. You're supposed to work as a team, but mistakes happen all the time. Someone shoots too early, someone gets lost, someone draws too much attention. And at some point, it all turns into pure improvisation. That unpredictability is what gives the game its atmosphere. You're never sure things will go according to plan. Deadlight. Deadlight stands out not because of its gameplay, but because of its mood. It's a journey through a world where everything has already happened and you're just moving through what's left. Silhouettes, sunsets, empty streets, it all feels like a memory of something long gone. You're not saving the world, you're just trying to keep going. Zombies aren't even the main threat here, they're more like part of the background. They create pressure, but the real atmosphere comes from loneliness and a sense of hopelessness. You keep moving forward not because you want to, but because you have no other choice. And that's exactly why Deadlight captures the feeling of an apocalypse so well. Into the Dead, Our Darkest Days. This takes a much quieter, more grounded approach. You control a group of survivors, hide, scavenge for resources, and try not to draw attention. There's no sense of power here. If anything, the game constantly reminds you how vulnerable you are. What really stands out is the shelter atmosphere. Sitting in the dark, listening to what's happening outside, knowing it's dangerous to leave. Every outing is a risk, every decision can cost a life. And instead of jump scares, the game builds tension through that constant pressure, the feeling that things can go wrong at any moment. State of Decay 2. This isn't just about survival, it's about life after the end. You're not alone here. You have a group, a base, resources, and all of it needs constant attention. The atmosphere comes from trying to hold onto some kind of order in a world that's already fallen apart. But the game never lets you relax. One mistake and you lose a character for good. Every supply run is a risk. Every encounter with a horde can turn into a disaster. And that mix of management and constant danger creates a very grounded, believable atmosphere where you're not a hero, just someone trying to hold on to what's left. Dead Space Remake. This is one of the most oppressive horror experiences out there, just set in space. There are no traditional zombies here, but the necromorphs create the same sense of danger, only more twisted. Tight corridors, creaking metal, total darkness. The game constantly keeps you on edge, where even silence feels threatening. What really stands out is the sound and lighting. You're often walking in near complete darkness, hearing something behind you but not knowing where the danger actually is. And when something does happen, it's not just a jump scare, it's real stress. The atmosphere works on a physical level. You're not just scared, you feel uncomfortable just being in this world. The Evil Within 2. This game does something interesting. It gives you more space, but somehow makes it even scarier. You're not stuck in tight corridors anymore. You're in a semi-open town, but that town feels empty, lifeless, and completely unfamiliar. And that's what creates this constant, uneasy feeling. The game constantly plays with your perception. You're never fully sure what's real and what isn't. Enemies appear out of nowhere, situations shift suddenly, and the atmosphere jumps from quiet exploration to sudden horror. In the end, it doesn't feel like just a zombie horror game. It feels more like a nightmare you're trying to escape. World War Z. This game builds its atmosphere not through fear, but through scale. It feels like the world is being completely overrun by waves of infected. You see massive hordes climbing over each other, swarming walls, and you realize this isn't a local outbreak, it's a global catastrophe. But it doesn't turn into mindless action. When a horde hits, it becomes pure panic. You're trying to hold your position, coordinate with your team, and use everything you've got. And that moment, when everything starts to fall apart and control slips away, is exactly what creates that feeling of chaos and desperation. Echoes of the Living. This is basically a love letter to classic Resident Evil, but with a more modern take on atmosphere. The camera, the pacing, the level design, everything is built around tension. You're constantly exploring, unlocking shortcuts, and trying to remember where it's safe. Even though safe places barely exist, the game thrives on slow, building pressure. There's no constant action. Instead, it forces you to move carefully, think ahead, and manage your resources. Every bullet matters, every encounter is a risk, and that old-school approach works surprisingly well because it brings back that feeling of vulnerability. Them and Us. This is another game that leans heavily into classic survival horror. Fixed camera angles, limited resources, slower pacing. It really takes you back to the old-school horror days, but with more modern visuals and presentation. The key thing here is the sense of danger. You can't just clear an area and relax. Ammo is limited, enemies are threatening, and sometimes the best option is to avoid them entirely. The atmosphere is built around that constant choice, fight or survive. And more often than not, the right choice is not to fight at all. The Last Stand, Aftermath. This game stands out with a really interesting idea. You play as someone who's already infected, but still trying to survive. And that immediately sets the tone. You have time, but it's limited. You know the end is coming, and that makes every decision feel heavier. The atmosphere is built around the road and constant forward movement. You explore, scavenge, deal with danger, and slowly realize you're not going to last forever. The game doesn't try to scare you directly. It creates pressure through the feeling that everything is temporary, and sooner or later you're going to lose. Dread Dawn. This game leans into a school setting, and that alone creates a very unique atmosphere. Instead of ruined cities and wastelands, you're in hallways, classrooms, familiar places that now feel completely wrong and unsafe. And that contrast works really well. It feels like a mix of survival and a bit of absurdity, but it never loses tension. You explore, gather resources, deal with zombies, and try to adapt. And it's the setting that really makes it memorable. It's still the same apocalypse, just happening in places that feel way too normal for something like this. The most atmospheric zombie games aren't remembered because of the action. They're remembered because of the moments when you actually felt uneasy, when you didn't want to open the next door, when silence felt more dangerous than the zombies themselves. And if a game can give you that feeling, then it's doing something right. The Image Game Channel was with you. Have a nice day.